Just recently, you were at Capitol Hill talking with lawmakers. You talked with both Democrats and Republicans about the market structure bill. How are those discussions going? Do you think we could see the market structure bill come to a vote before the end of the year?
I've heard timelines that they're aiming.
So, Sergey, you started this conversation by saying how you think all assets will eventually be brought on-chain and tokenized. And I know that you met Paul Atkins, I believe, a few months ago and had discussions with him about broader tokenization of all real-world assets. What came from that meeting?
So that's what I was talking about, is that problem needs to be solved. And just to be clear, that's the problem Chainlink works on with CCIP. Chainlink is making the standards to make that system of transaction that meets all those requirements of cross-chain connectivity, data connectivity, compliance, all these different questions.
I'm just curious if you have any sort of view at all in terms of the way things could shape up in terms of the broader market, broader altcoin market in the next few months. Just maybe a little bit of hopium for the audience or something. GM everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Coin Bureau podcast. My name is Nick, and today we've got a very special guest for you. It is Mr. Sergey Nazarov, the CEO and founder of Chainlink Labs, the development company behind Chainlink. So Sergey, welcome to the Coin Bureau.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Now, Sergey, you've had a very busy week. Indeed, earlier this week, you were at the Fed, and just recently, you were at Capitol Hill talking with lawmakers. But let's just start there with what happened yesterday on the Hill. You talked with both Democrats and Republicans about the market structure bill. So how are those discussions going, and when do you think we could see progress on that front?
I mean, I think we're already seeing progress now. I think both groups are very motivated. So there is a lot of political will from both groups. I think the thing that happened is what we've been pushing for in DC, which is explaining to people in DC that market structure and our industry in general is not just about cryptocurrency, but it's also about the global financial system or the next version of the global financial system. And so I would say that, when this process started in the middle of the year for market structure in earnest, what you really had was people thinking that this was a bill about crypto. But now, because they understand that it's about the financial system, in addition to crypto, there's actually more political will than in the beginning. The problem is that there's so many other areas where the Democrats and the Republicans have a lot of contention. The government shutdown is happening right now in the US, but both of them consistently say that this is a bipartisan issue, which means that it's not in the benefit of any one group. It's like a shared benefit to both groups and to the US. So I think there is definitely progress. There's two final issues that need to get resolved. What does the bill do for DeFi? And what does the bill do for AML, KYC, and illicit finance, and making sure that illicit finance is not something that happens in a properly governed kind of system?
Got it. You mentioned there that the importance of this as more of a market structure than just crypto. Could you expand on that specifically in terms of why this is more important from the perspective of the markets than not just a crypto-specific bill?
Sure. Yeah. So my point of view is, and the point of view that we've been explaining to people in DC, and the point of view that we explain more and more successfully to people in the capital markets, like large institutions, the largest institutions in the world, is that the digital asset trend, the real world asset tokenization trend, is the conversion of the financial system into our industry. So from my point of view, cryptocurrencies are kind of like email in the internet in the early days of that technology's adoption. And so at a certain point, if you were to ask someone about the internet, it would be synonymous with email because that was the main use case of the internet, right? And then you had other use cases for the internet that massively outstrip email as a use case, right? Like we don't use the majority of our time on the internet doing email. We do a lot of other stuff on the internet, e-commerce, consuming video, in this case, making video, so on and so on. What I mean about the market aspect of this is that the whole global financial system, the US financial system, will be tokenized, and then it'll be managed through a collection of smart contracts. And that new version of the financial system is very important for our industry because it represents what mainstream adoption looks like. I don't think that mainstream adoption looks like everybody sells all their real estate and all their gold and all their stocks, and then they all buy Bitcoin, and 100% of everyone's portfolio is Bitcoin. That's not realistic. I think what's realistic is that the percent of everyone's portfolio that's Bitcoin or cryptocurrency goes from sub 1% to 5%, which, would get you to that $1 million per Bitcoin number. But then everything else in their portfolio, as an asset manager, a sovereign wealth fund, whoever you are, all the other stuff in your portfolio is tokenized. And that's really the next stage of our industry and its growth. And that's actually what we're driving a lot of.
Okay, we'll get on to tokenized real-world assets in a bit. But coming back to the market structure bill itself, obviously, in order this grand vision, you obviously also need to get the Democrats on board as well. And I believe, as you mentioned, there was this potential DeFi provision, which concerned a lot of people on the Democrat side. So I'm curious, do you think that the Democrats are closer now to a consensus around a reasonable crypto market structure bill? And how have the discussions been going with that side of the aisle?
I feel like the pattern with our industry in DC and also partly in the capital markets has always been a collection of misunderstandings. So it's a large collection of misunderstandings about what DeFi does and doesn't do, what it is to begin with. Also, similarly, one of the issues tied to the DeFi conversation was illicit financing. So that's using blockchains for sending around, money in ways that it shouldn't be sent around. Illicit financing in the blockchain infrastructure is actually well below 1%, whereas in the traditional system, it's between 1 and 5%, depending on the type of illicit financing. So there's just a lot of misunderstandings that need to be cleared up still. And that's what you see when industry CEOs like myself and the other CEOs that were at this meeting with the Democrats and then another meeting with the Republicans. And then I know that most of the CEOs that went to those meetings then had private one-on-one meetings with many of the senators. We just need to make sure that they understand. In my experience, once people understand the transparency properties of blockchains, the reliability of DeFi, the inability for DeFi to be manipulated in ways that centralized financial systems can be manipulated, it all becomes very beneficial. I think the problem is there just is not a clear understanding. And the reason for that with government folks, especially senators, is that the senators have so many issues they need to cover. They have like 20 or 30 issues that they need to vote on and cover. And so they have all of these staffers and all of these people who kind of know each issue for them. And then they listen to those people pretty heavily. But the Republicans have invested much more in understanding our industry. But once again, my experience is that once they learn about it and they understand what it does, and the confusion of what it does and doesn't do falls away, really everyone is pro-crypto because the transparency, the reliability, the lack of manipulation that can happen in financial systems, all of these things are like really a dream come true, which is why the SEC is so pro-crypto now, because finally the SEC, after many years of working towards this goal, finally they understand. They understand that, blockchains are actually better and oracles are actually better and smart contracts are actually better than the current system. So I think you'll eventually see the same thing. It's just different groups in DC are on different timelines for their understanding of the reality of what our industry and its technology does.
Yeah, we just need to get more of those Democratic staffers watching content like this, learning more about the benefits of smart contracts. It's fully permissionless and transparent. So, of course, now we have the government shutdown, and that's slowing a lot of things, including this potential bill. And I'm curious then, depends when this shutdown will end. But if you were to guess, do you think we could see the market structure bill come to a vote before the end of the year?
I've heard timelines that they're aiming before Thanksgiving is the timeline that they're hoping for to get it out there on the floor and voted on, is what I've understood is the goal, because past Thanksgiving, even then already things begin to slow down. I mean, I'm still optimistic about it, but I do feel that it is at risk between the government shutdown and there still being these two open issues of DeFi and the proper regulation of DeFi, which from my point of view is very light or no regulation. And then also illicit finance and how that'll be managed in this new crypto ecosystem, for which we also have very clear and succinct answers. but I feel that it's at risk. It's still possible, and I'm optimistic, but it getting done this year, I think, is at risk at this point.
Playing devil's advocate. I mean, let's assume, and you say it's at risk, let's assume that it doesn't get past this year and then just falls off the radar next year, and we don't get this hallowed market structure bill passed, which is really important for the industry. I guess, what do you think the implications could be then for this pro-crypto shift from the White House and everything? Could this be at risk?
I mean, in that scenario, what what you would default to would be rulemaking. So there's legislation, there's law, and there's rulemaking. And rulemaking is from the regulatory agencies. And so the SEC and the CFTC, the SEC is extremely pro-crypto, and the CFTC, everybody I think up for consideration as the chairman of the SEC, of the CFTC, is also very pro-crypto. So in that world, you just wouldn't have clarity from the legislative side, and you would just have individual guidance, rulemaking on different topics coming out of those two regulators, and also probably the Treasury and the OCC inside of the Treasury. So you'd have specific groups that have to create guidance, that have to create rules, just starting to make the rules without the guidance of the legislative process.
Okay. So moving on, earlier this week, as I mentioned, you were at the Fed, and you talked about the persistent challenges of interoperability in financial markets. So can you expand on that specifically?
Yeah. So if it's cheaper and cheaper to make a chain, which it is, and there's more and more institutions making chains, Stripe made a chain, Circle made a chain, Swift announced making a chain, a lot of other people are going to be making chains, and all of those chains have capital in them, right? They have a user base. They have keys with capital or users behind them that want to deploy capital. And those chains aren't connected to each other. You're going to be in a very fragmented world of these kinds of islands of liquidity that are separated from each other. That's not very good. And in that world, everyone seeks out the one or two or three chains with the most liquidity, and they try to join those chains. There's an alternative world where everyone launches a bunch of chains, and the connectivity between the chains is so good and so cheap and so efficient that it's like using the internet, right? Like you spin up a cloud server in GCP, and I spin up a cloud server in AWS, and my cloud server wants to deal with your cloud server on something, exchange some information or something. It's not a problem. Nobody has a problem getting that done. There's not a question. There isn't a question. What do you use? What do I use? How do we get my server to talk to your server? That's a solved problem in the internet over TCP/IP. In terms of serving websites, it's a solved problem in terms of HTTP, HTTPS. So that's what I was talking about, is that problem needs to be solved. And just to be clear, that's the problem Chainlink works on with CCIP. So CCIP is our cross-chain interoperability protocol. It's an open global standard to connect those chains across private chains, public chains, all chains in a cheap, efficient, high volume, easy to connect to way. And then there's also other protocols within the Chainlink universe of standards, such as ODP, the on-chain data protocol, which plays the role of putting the most data on-chain of any protocol out there by far, which is the protocol through which Chainlink powers over 70% of DeFi globally and over 85% of DeFi on chains like Ethereum through those data protocols. So you need standards is the point. The point is the existing financial system has standards that simplify and make transactions and relationships easy and efficient. When you don't have standards, everyone has to figure out every step in their relationship, which makes transacting very costly. And so Chainlink is making the standards to make that system of transaction that meets all those requirements of cross-chain connectivity, data connectivity, compliance, all these different questions.
Yeah, it's a good point in terms of all these corpo chains launching now, and to try and basically abstract away all the complexity of that interoperability. But crypto systems are more advanced in terms of the ability to be interoperable. But I'm curious in terms of the challenges with the archaic Web 2 and TradFi systems. Like, what are the biggest challenges you think that exist on that front with making them interoperable with Web 3 systems?
It's just a ton of work. It's really just a ton of work. So you have these things that are running off of really long time technologies. They have their own way of doing things. Every different institution sometimes has a unique way of using this long time technology. Some of these messages are in XML, some of them are in ISO 20022 standards. Some of them don't have APIs. They just send you messages. Here's a message, parse the message. Some of this information is sent in CSV files, so in Excel files. So, like there's a ton of different legacy stuff. And what Chainlink does for that level of interoperability, it's an efficient system to integrate with all those legacy formats and to convert them into blockchain events. And then also to convert the blockchain events back into the legacy format, which is also important because most of the institutions that are 40, 50, 60 years old, they are forced to operate off of their existing systems. So they need their existing system to be able to instruct a blockchain event, like make a wallet, put a stable coin in the wallet, move the stable coin in exchange for a tokenized fund or a Bitcoin. Those simple events really need to be managed through their existing systems. And then when those events happen on chain, we have the Bitcoin, here's your wallet address, we move the stable coin. Their systems need to know about that because they need to record that. They need, everyone needs to know what happened. So there's that level of interoperability. And then there's also the cross-chain level of interoperability. Because Chainlink does both, and it's the only system right now that does both, it provides a kind of unique value in that you can actually trigger a cross-chain event from your legacy system. So you can go into your legacy system and you can send some message, some legacy system message that says, make me a wallet. Once it gets a stable coin, move the stable coin from chain A to chain B to this address to pay or, to deposit into a lending market and return to me back the confirmations. And that instruction is what hits Chainlink. And then Chainlink executes that instruction. But because Chainlink also does cross-chain through CCIP, it can execute it not just on one chain, but on multiple chains. And my very strong belief, from what I've seen, is that the vast majority of high-value transactions or even moderate-value transactions will be cross-chain because all the assets and all the payments will be on various chains. Like JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or Citi or someone will make an address for their client on their chain. And then from that chain, they will then send their, stable coin or tokenized deposit or whatever to another chain in payment. But then that other chain has to send back the asset that was bought. That's called DVP, delivery versus payment. That needs to be executed by a system. That's something that Chainlink executes, the most of in the capital markets right now, those type of DVP flows at different stages of their development. And those DVP flows can be very complicated, which is where the data comes in and the compliance identity information comes in. But, that's a deeper topic.
Yeah, indeed. So obviously that's a big component of what Chainlink does is interoperability with CCIP, but of course best known for being an Oracle network that brings off-chain data on-chain. And one of the biggest partnerships that you announced this year was bringing the US government, the US Department of Commerce data on-chain. And that's huge. So can you walk me through exactly how that partnership took shape?
Sure. So we actually got in contact with them through other folks that they were working with that knew us, that worked with us already. And they recommended us to them because they had a good experience working with us as many of the top teams and companies do. Department of Commerce looked at our technology and then we collaborated with them to come up with a plan where Chainlink puts multiple pieces of data at different frequencies on chain. Right now, we're the technology that puts the most data on chain for the Department of Commerce. Multiple different data sets about economic performance, basically. And then, interestingly, we also recently announced our work together with Polymarket, where Polymarket has started using Chainlink data to settle their markets. And so the place where I think all of this will evolve actually is that all the government data that we're putting and more that we're going to be putting is something that we're going to show the community of users that we have, including the prediction markets like Polymarket. And I think it would be cool if there could be all kinds of, prediction markets against real world government data from the official source. So I think the goal here is not just to get the government data on chain. The goal here, and one of the reasons they also chose to work with Chainlink, is because Chainlink is not just the most widely used technology for putting data on chain. It's also the most widely used technology for consuming the data on chain, which means that when you put your data on chain via Chainlink, you have access to the biggest market of data consumers. which is, very important success factor for data frameworks and data systems. It's not just, who is putting data with you, it's who are all the users. And so Chainlink is powering 70% plus of DeFi, over 85% on top chains like Ethereum in many cases. And so that is resulting in a big market. So it was both the quality of the technology and also the fact that they would be able to reach the largest market or the largest user group that could build the most interesting stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there's definitely the benefits for DeFi to be able to access this data on chain. But I guess the question here is that I had is, are there any additional benefits, like one would say, for actually publishing government data on chain in a transparent manner, apart from the uses in DeFi, but for the average person who's seen, okay, now the Commerce Department is publishing GDP data on chain. Why would they want to do this? What's the benefit for us? Could you maybe elucidate that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two benefits. One benefit is a kind of a transparency benefit that they are memorializing and recording the data at that time so that changing it would be impossible. And so you have like an authoritative golden source of truth about this being the data at that time, as well as, maybe even the calculation method, the inputs into the data can be put there. So you can really memorialize and kind of prove that that was the data at that time. And then the other value is the universe of contracts is continuing to grow. So the amount of smart contracts that do useful things with data, insurance contracts, prediction market contracts, all kinds of contracts that do important and valuable things with data, they are all very advanced now and they're getting more usage. So I think it's also the fact that you can drive smart contracts off of this data in more and more useful ways. So I think it's both of those things.
Okay, got it. So keeping with the pro-crypto regulatory slant here, earlier this year you attended the first ever White House Crypto Summit in March. And if you can cast your mind back to that event, what was it like sharing Chainlink's vision directly with the President of the United States and his top officials?
Awesome. It was absolutely awesome. I mean, at the end of the day, I was really kind of surprised by two things. I was surprised by how senior all the people were in the room. You had the people on the camera, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Commerce, the President, whole bunch of really senior folks. You also had a bunch of people that weren't on camera, like the CFTC commissioner, the SEC commissioner, a whole bunch of very influential people. So it was a very clear sign that there's a strong commitment from DC towards our industry because of the seniority of the people committed to it. And so that was a big signal. And then the second thing was the level of understanding that senior folks had about our industry was actually very high. So we've worked with multiple governments and central banks in Dubai, Singapore, in Hong Kong, in all these different jurisdictions that are very pro-crypto and that have always been very positive towards it. And, we've encountered, I would say, different levels of understanding. In the US, the level of understanding at that event was very high, which I found to be very positive because, as I said earlier in our chat here, once people understand what smart contracts actually do and what blockchains actually do, is like understanding why cars are better than horses. Once you're like, oh, okay, no, I can see why I would want a car. It really accelerates everything because our industry really kind of sells itself because it's so good at what it does as a technology. And that was a very positive sign for me because that depth of understanding means that, people already will understand the value sooner, which I am seeing now. So on that base of understanding from then, I have seen people's understanding here in DC at the senior levels grow. So, we've met with various chairmen of agencies, top commissioners, and so on. And there is a pretty deep level of understanding. And I think that is thanks to President Trump and David Sachs and the way that they've made it a very clear public priority for everyone in DC to understand and have a plan and take our industry seriously. So I think our industry owes a huge debt of gratitude to Trump administration, David Sachs. I think they have not just kind of endorsed our industry and moved on. There's a consistent pressure to make sure that the commissioners, the chairman of the different departments, the governors of the Fed, all these different folks are genuinely planning to use the technology and genuinely learning more about it. which I have to tell you is absolutely amazing. If you told me a year ago that would be happening, it'd be hard to believe. But I'm in DC right now, and I'm experiencing it literally day to day now.
Like light and day compared to what it was last year, right?
Exactly.
I don't know if you recall from that particular White House meeting that Scott Bessent gave you a shout out to President Trump I think on camera. He was like, he pointed to you like a Bitcoin OG. And I don't know if you saw that clip from back at the White House conference. I remember it doing the rounds on crypto Twitter. So Mr. Bessent's definitely a fan. So keeping with this pro crypto slant from the administration, a piece of legislation that did get passed recently is, of course, the Genius Act as it relates to stablecoins. Now, they're, of course, in the regulatory spotlight. And I guess how important was a clear stablecoin regulation, such as the Genius Act, for Chainlink's mission?
I think it's critical for our industry as a whole, and Chainlink powers so much of the industry that anything that grows the industry is definitely good for the Chainlink ecosystem and protocols and standards adoption. Because when you power that much, growth of the industry actually becomes your main concern, right? Once you cross powering 50%, your concern becomes, okay, how big is the thing that we're helping power? How do we get it to be bigger and more successful? So I think it affects Chainlink in two ways. One way is it massively grows the industry and makes it more successful because stablecoins and tokenized deposits really represent on-chain cash. And on-chain cash represents a market size. So if there's $1 billion in on-chain cash, that's the market to which you can sell a real-world asset, right? Unless you want to get paid in Bitcoin for the real-world asset, which most real-world assets are not denominated in Bitcoin, they're denominated in dollars or some currency. And let's say then the on-chain cash grows to 500 billion. Okay, wow, now you have a $500 billion market that you can sell something to. But let's say it grows to 5 trillion. Now you have a $5 trillion market. And so the bigger the pool of on-chain cash is, the bigger a market there is for issuers of real-world assets to capture, right? So if I issue high-quality tokenized real estate, tokenized funds, tokenized gold, tokenized whatever, I have a bigger user base that can buy it with on-chain cash, whether that's a stable coin, a tokenized deposit, CBDC, or whatever. So it's very beneficial in that sense. And that grows the industry, and Chainlink powers the majority of the industry. So, that grows what Chainlink powers. The second way it affects Chainlink is Chainlink makes specific technology for stablecoins, namely proof of reserves, together with a feature called securement. So proof of reserves has two variations. One variation is where it creates transparency. The place where this would have been useful is if, for example, FTX had proven their balance sheet using Chainlink proof of reserves, they would have never had a run on their system because everyone would have known what their balance sheet was in real time. No problem. Same thing with Silicon Valley Bank. If Silicon Valley Bank had used proof of reserves to prove what their underlying assets were in real time, the market wouldn't have been surprised. There wouldn't have been a run on Silicon Valley Bank. There's another version of proof of reserves where you use the reserves to do something called secure mint. And that's where a smart contract that is responsible for minting new stablecoins is unable to mint new coins unless the proof of reserves checks the reserves, right? So if I have $100 billion, I can print $100 billion worth of stablecoins. I can't print 101 billion. And that capability avoids overminting. And overminting is one of the biggest risks for stablecoins, where you accidentally, or because a hacker comes and they mint more of the coin than you're allowed to mint. So that proof of reserve technology, both as a transparency mechanism and as a minting security mechanism, is getting a lot of adoption now from Chainlink, from the Chainlink set of standards. And then the other technology is CCIP, the cross-chain interoperability protocol. CCIP powers many leading stable coins, like World Liberty Finance's stablecoin is completely powered by CCIP. Aave stablecoin Go is completely powered by CCIP and others. So CCIP is another technology that stablecoins find very useful because you need to connect the stablecoins to all the places where people can buy things with them. And then what CCIP is built to do is not just connect public chains, but it's actually built to make sure that you can be compliant and connect your chain or your stablecoin to lots of private chains, all of those corporate chains we were talking about. And that's actually very important because a lot of the leading assets will be generated on those chains. So what CCIP does is it allows stablecoins to be used on public chains, but also to be exchanged for assets from private chains, which can then flow into public chains.
Got it. It's really interesting the point you raised around the proof of mint. I don't know if you saw the news. I think it was last week where Paxos accidentally minted $300 trillion or stablecoins accidentally. It was a fat finger, but I guess this is exactly where this technology could have helped, right? In terms of proving the reserves to be able to mint an extra stablecoin pair.
Yeah, a secure mint implementation, those contracts would have completely made that impossible because the proof of reserves oracle would have checked the custody API and it would have seen that there is not $300 trillion in this account. And therefore it would have said, I'm rejecting your request to mint 300 trillion. And that would have, been an error in the contract, but it would have made the minting impossible. Personally, I think that proof of reserves, we have something called proof of composition, proof of liabilities, and proof of solvency. So proof of reserves is the beginning of many different types of proofs. I feel that financial institutions, issuers will be compelled by the market to issue more information on chain in order for the market to assess the risk of the issued asset, as well as the underlying systems controlling the asset, such as the custodian's credit rating, and eventually also any liabilities that have a claim on the asset. I feel proof of reserves really is just the beginning, but in this very simple example, it would have absolutely made this impossible. There's other failure scenarios, like, you have a bunch of liabilities that nobody knows about. That also needs to be resolved through proof of liabilities. But that's a later stage of our industry. I think once people get more comfortable with proof of reserves and a few other things.
So, Sergey, you started this conversation by saying how you think all assets will eventually be brought on chain and tokenized. And I know that you met Paul Atkins, I believe, a few months ago and had discussions with him about broader tokenization of all real world assets. What came from that meeting?
When the government was still open,
yes.
We were doing multiple meetings a day with the SEC. Even the day I met with Chairman Atkins, our team went back in later that day to meet with the SEC staff on a number of different topics across transfer agency, tokenization. So even before my meeting with Chairman Atkins, there were many, many meetings between the SEC staff, senior staff, and our team. And what we're discussing and are discussing with them, and we'll be discussing hopefully even more when the government opens back up, is how can the laws and the record-keeping systems and the requirements for traditional finance be simplified so that they can be executed by a chain. So how do you make it simple for equity to get tokenized, for commodities to get tokenized, for value to move across chains in an efficient, compliant way, for AML KYC requirements to be met without a multi-month process? How do these requirements get simplified? And the answer to that, the basic answer to that, is cryptographic proof. So the powerful thing that our industry's technology does, that blockchains and smart contracts and oracles do, is they provide incontrovertible, immutable proof that something happened. And what oracles do, what Chainlink does, is it allows that proof to be about things outside of a chain. So for example, if you prove your identity, then it can be reused again and again to do transactions. If you prove that you have assets, then you can automatically become creditworthy to participate in a transaction. And we can rely on that proof. You see, that's another great example is what we were just saying with proof of reserves. So why should I get your stablecoin? Well, I have a proof of reserves, I have a proof of composition, and I have a proof of liability. So you know that I have the assets backing the coin. You know that I don't have any liabilities that have a claim on the assets. And you know the status of my custodian and that I'm in a good standing with them. And so you're kind of in a world where in the traditional financial system, you couldn't prove these things to each other. You had to have a lot of people check the same thing 50 times. And that's actually one of the main reasons it was so costly to run a bank, is because everyone had to check everything 50 times. But now what we can do is we can put the information on chain one time and everyone can check it from that one time. And so they don't need to re-verify the information. And that's actually extremely powerful for the financial system and for regulators, because the regulators can also check that piece of information. And they, for example, don't have to request it from anyone. They can just check it. So the world we're going towards constructing here is a world of smart contracts, tokenized assets, and various proofs of reserve, proofs of identity, proofs of solvency, proofs that you have the authority to do a transaction, and then all the connectivity to all the systems that provide those proofs, and all the connectivity to all the chains that have all the value that want to interact with all the other systems that have value. And actually, this is very beneficial for society and for regulators because it makes their job a lot easier, not harder, because they can look on chain and see that this transaction is completely fine.
Yeah. So you actually think that all assets will be brought on chain and tokenized in an eventual future, assuming we get regulation that helps bring that to the fore?
Absolutely. I think we'll be in a world where it was like, do I want to deal with you over the internet or do I want to deal with you over postal mail? And there's a period where people are still sending letters and they're also using the internet. And then you have a transition to a world where nobody sends letters anymore and they just use the internet. And I think we're still in the part of the world where everyone predominantly sends letters. And we're at the start of the transition to people starting to send letters and use email on the internet, right? That's where we are now. But the efficiency, the security, actually all the economic benefits, I'll give you an example. In the traditional financial system, if you have an asset, you can post it as collateral 21 hours, 5 days a week. So you can't use it on weekends and you can't move it in certain times. And if you can't post it as collateral, you can't use its economic value, basically. In blockchain land, you can post collateral 24/7, 365. That in and of itself is huge value, not to mention the yields that are better on chain than they are off chain. So I think fundamentally there is just so much really raw economic value from having a tokenized version of an equity or a commodity or a fund that it'll become the preferred way to issue, to hold, and to manage assets, all assets.
So I want to move on to something more specific now regarding in the crypto space more specifically that happened on the 10th of October. And the reason I'm bringing this up in the conversation with you is because I'm curious to get your take, being the founder of a massive Oracle network that provides off-chain data and putting it on-chain. And this comes to the pricing of collateral. For the people who don't know what I'm talking about, on the 10th of October, we had this massive liquidation event on exchanges because of exchanges referencing a price that was on their order books and not a verifiable price on other exchanges or indeed other providers. So I'm curious, Sergey, what was your takeaway from this event, more specifically as it relates to the importance of correct pricing across multiple venues and not just one?
I mean, my reaction is should have used Chainlink. It's my reaction.
That's true.
At the end of the day, the reason Chainlink powers approximately 70% of DeFi and over 85% of DeFi and leading chains like Ethereum is because it creates a reliable global price that is immune or has been immune to these market shocks. There were many market shocks that happened. One market shock was the FTX market shock, and Chainlink prices were completely accurate and correct during that. Whereas a lot of settlement events and liquidation events and other places were inaccurate. Also, Chainlink has been, for many good reliability reasons, immune even to global outages of globally used infrastructure like AWS. So, for example, the recent AWS outage, vast majority of other bridges, even some of the leading other bridges, all went down for multiple hours. CCIP didn't go down for a minute. The data services continued to operate during that AWS outage. There's actually a multitude of these failure scenarios. What people might not fully understand about building reliable systems is you don't build reliable systems for the 362 days when everything is smooth. That's not what reliable systems are built for. Reliable systems are built for the 3 days where everything goes crazy. And sometimes two things at once could go crazy. So imagine if you had a crypto market event at the same time that you have an AWS outage. Now you have this AWS outage that took down pretty much everyone else that puts Oracle data on chain other than Chainlink. There's this crazy market event, but the prices are stuck for everyone else. And so everyone else who doesn't use Chainlink is stuck on because of the volatility, really old prices, really dislocated prices, experiencing all kinds of crazy liquidation and arbitrage events. But if you use Chainlink, as in this example, you would have had a reliable global price and you would have been immune to something like this, global or region-wide AWS outage. And just to be clear, that's why Chainlink is Chainlink. Chainlink is Chainlink. Chainlink secures over 100 billion US dollars and has enabled over 25 trillion US dollars in transaction value because it is built to withstand those 3 days. And it has historically withstood those 3 days, including, remember back when Ethereum would have 2,500 gas, nobody could get transactions in? Guess what system didn't miss a single transaction? Chainlink. There's all these failure modes. You have failure modes where the chains don't operate as expected. You have failure modes where global infrastructure for cloud computing and node operations doesn't operate as expected. You have failure modes where liquidity dries up in certain markets and exchanges. And the point is to build a system that can think through and adapt to these failure modes. That is what Chainlink has set out to do. Now, Chainlink might not always do it exactly perfectly, but so far, it has by far the best track record. And the two examples that I just showed you are by far, wonderful examples where pretty much every other version of an Oracle for bridging or data failed, but, Chainlink stayed up.
In that specific case, it was, again, referencing internal order books and like you say, not using Chainlink. But I guess as it relates to the crypto space, do you still think that there is work to be done when it comes to getting information that can be considered the verifiable truth as Chainlink has achieved? Like what other parts or spaces in the crypto space do you think still need work when it comes to actually getting to the verifiable truth as it relates to off-chain data?
So market data, Chainlink has, I think, done a good job in providing that at scale to DeFi and now to TradFi, because we announced partnerships with S&P, ICE, Deutsche Börse, so there's a lot of institutional data already coming on chain. I would have said institutional data, but, we're far ahead and far along now in dealing with institutional data. Then there was bridging related data, which with the launch of CCIP and its continued rapid adoption, I think CCIP solves the reliability issues of bridges. The other two types of data are basically subjective unstructured data and identity data. So identity data is something that Chainlink is working heavily now on getting on chain for multiple different identity sources. And identity data is going to be very important for AML KYC compliance on chain, forms of regulated DeFi like Aave Horizon and others. So identity is going to be important data. And then you have an interesting dynamic where we have AI oracles. And the AI oracles are able to be directed towards what's called unstructured data. So a PDF or a news article or some set of usually written information. And then you start relying on the AI's assessment. But then what we do with the oracles is we run multiple AIs and we come to consensus on the AI's results to minimize hallucinations and disagreement between the AIs and so on. And also control for bias, if there's some kind of like ideological bias in some of the AIs. I would say that, that's a big interesting frontier where it's like, there's no data feed on this thing, but if you get an AI to look at it, or if you get enough AIs to look at it and agree that it's this way, then you can turn that into a data feed. And then you can drive, prediction markets, DeFi, TradFi off of that data. And we already have these AI oracles in TradFi. We have them in DeFi. We have them in a number of places. And that's interesting. That's very interesting.
Keeping with the crypto space now and zoom in a bit out, and I know you obviously got your head down there in Washington working on, trying to inform regulations and also all these partnerships on the B2B front. But I think in the retail crypto side of the sentiment is quite low as it relates to market conditions. And that's just because of what's been happening with altcoins. And I believe a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken, you made a comparison in terms of like the altcoin market these days compared to back in the 2021 cycle, and the fact that there's just too many projects out there right now, too much dilution and all of that. And I'm just curious if you have any sort of view at all in terms of the way things could shape up in terms of the broader altcoin market in the next few months. Just maybe a little bit of hopium for the audience or something.
I mean, I think altcoins are great. Back when the first altcoins appeared, they were called app coins back in like 2014. I have seen a lot of capital flow into our industry and benefit a lot of smart folks, a lot of smart teams, because it's given them the opportunity to build, high quality systems, infrastructure, chains, applications. And I think that capital, even if sometimes it goes to places where something doesn't work out, that's the nature of capitalism. And so I think that as long as there are innovative problems to solve in our industry and altcoins can serve a utility role, like a valuable role in the system that they're powering, that altcoins will continue to appear and do well because they fundamentally are inventing something new. And I think there's still a lot of new, useful, exciting things that can be made in our industry and that can have an altcoin connected to it. I think there's still a bright future there.
Okay, got it. From the technological angle, for sure. I'm just curious, because market conditions have been rough, but I think that's the good point. It's like, as long as people focus on those projects that have solving for a real world problem and are with hardworking teams, and they use the altcoin itself as an incentive mechanism or utility mechanism, I'm sure there'll be a lot of projects people can hone in on. So Sergey, just to finish off with, where do you see Chainlink in the next 5 years, and what milestones are you aiming for?
So Chainlink is a set of global standards for how to transact within and across chains. And that set of standards provides the necessary data, necessary connection between chains, necessary connection from chains to other systems, outside systems. And so what I'm seeing now is a massive increase in the amount of smart contracts that need data, need connectivity to other chains, need connectivity to existing systems, need connectivity to identity, need connectivity to AIs, and so on. From my point of view, the real goal of Chainlink and the Chainlink community is to make a set of standards that are the leading global standards at 60, 70, 80, 90% adoption, just like TCP/IP or HTTPS or Linux are the leading standards in their respective fields. But Chainlink standards are about blockchain transactions. So if I want to do a blockchain transaction that requires a piece of data, the Chainlink standard is how I do it. If I need a blockchain transaction that moves across 2 chains or 5 chains, the Chainlink CCIP protocol, the cross-chain protocol, is how it happens. If I need to prove identity of my user to the counterparty in another system, the Chainlink identity standard, CCID, the cross-chain identity, is how it happens. And that's going to happen based on the quality of those standards and the quality of the Oracle networks that deliver those standards into those contracts. And so Chainlink is really kind of 2 things. It's that set of standards and those protocols to provide the data, connectivity, identity, all these other key factors. And it's also the node infrastructure that runs those standards, runs those protocols to get all of that into those contracts. And so in 5 years, I think we'll be in a world of a lot of real world asset tokenization. I think the amount of real world assets like equities, commodities, and funds is going to be larger than cryptocurrencies. So I think if the cryptocurrency industry is going to be 10 trillion, then the real world asset industry will be 40 trillion. So it'll be bigger. I think Chainlink will hopefully be powering the majority of that. There will be a very good and positive relationship between the DeFi community and the TradFi community, making them increasingly indistinguishable, because the TradFi community will be a regular user of DeFi, and the DeFi community will be working with TradFi to get their customers to use more of DeFi. And that'll require the type of regulatory clarity, that I'm working on here in DC. And it'll also require the technology to get the TradFi value and user base to connect into the DeFi contracts. And for the DeFi contracts to prove back to the TradFi user base and back to the TradFi institution that, they are safe and reliable enough to transact with through, proof of reserves and proof of many different things. So I think that's the world we'll hopefully be in. It's a very exciting world and positive world for our industry. I think the thing that people should understand really is that TradFi adoption and real world asset tokenization and stablecoins just brings more value on chain. And a portion of that value will get converted to cryptocurrency. So the more value that gets tokenized, the more stable coins that get generated, the more tokenized funds that get put on chain. That's more and more value in the chain ecosystem that can be converted to cryptocurrency eventually. And so it's actually all very beneficial to the cryptocurrency community.
That's what's going to save altcoin season for everyone, is all the liquidity coming in from stablecoins. So yeah, so that's a very ambitious vision, but I think you guys are well on your way to achieving it. Hopefully, the regulations that you guys are helping the policymakers implement could actually bring that forward. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you very much, and we should do it again soon.
Great chatting with you. Thank you for having me.